All right, so let's go over part one of Program Design 101. So this is high level, looking at how the majority of your everyday client, person ranging from 30 to 75, wants to train, perform in order to move better, function better, feel better, and ultimately see some physique changes. So this isn't for an extreme athlete, this isn't for a specific case. This is the general understanding of how a program is being functionally built stage by stage for part one. And then we'll go in part two to the latter aspect of how to actually write that program. So I'm going to go here and go screen share, slide on over, and here we go. All right, so Program Design 101, part one. All right, so programming is an art. Like, it's as simple as that. And your main purpose of this art is the art of reduction and simplification. If you've ever looked at some of the most beautiful artistic pieces in the world, there's not much to it, right? The greatest music has the simplest melodies, the hook that catches, and it's because it is really the meat of whatever that is that needs to be able to come through. It needs to be able to express itself. And so we have thousands of exercises in our brains, easily, right? We can come up with, probably 100 different squat variations fairly easily if we just change the tool, the slight position, in different things, right? And it is not that we need more, but that we need less. And our goal is ultimately to understand the client so well. We understand their goals, we understand their lifestyle, we understand their needs, we understand their body, that we can remove 99% of those. And so we can figure out whether a simple goblet squat with a kettlebell is going to be more helpful for them, or a double kettlebell is going to be more helpful for them, or loading them up with a barbell on their back, or maybe no squat variation, but that movement pattern is what we still need to actually train. And so the more you get into this, the more I challenge you to think, how can I reduce? How simple can I make this? Because that is where the results and the secret and the magic lies, right? The greatest plans that I have ever done for a group class, first, let's just say, the ones that people rave about, usually it is not something where we're doing any type of complex, sexy, Instagram, worthy, social media type exercise at all. It's the fact that they're like, oh my gosh, that one was so good, and I'm sore, and it like did so much. And I'm like, yeah, we did a squat, we did a push, we did a pull, and we did them on repeat. And then I did some rotational things. It's really as simple as that, right? So just wanted to do that. All right. So for the most part, with most of our clients, we're using the R7 approach. We may not use all of the fundamental pieces for every single client because there's going to be more individually expressed. But ultimately, this is what we're doing. And it's just a way to make designing workouts easy and simple for not only strength coaches, for you guys, but it's also a way for a client to understand what is happening. It's an easy way for you to understand what is happening to then be able to explain it. And the more that you can teach and explain something in a simple manner to a client, the better they are to get it, to get results, and to stick with it, right? So the R7 approach comes from Mike Robertson, phenomenal strength coach out of Indianapolis. And so you can like Google in any of his stuff if you ever need his website, his social handles, YouTube, etc. But ultimately, it's just putting an easy framework. That's what this is, in order to create training. This is not a be-all, end-all, catch-all. Again, it is a framework. So modules and frameworks are super helpful for us to have order and systems. That also means that they can be challenging in the sense that they keep us locked into an order and a system. So there are definitely things and times we need to break from that box and that system. But overall, it will give you context on how to consistently write a program that works for 90% of people, if not more, right? So we're going to go through all of these things, but you can see that there is a curve here. Client comes in, maybe it's early morning, they're fatigued, from not having enough sleep, they're not warmed up, their body is cold, it's achy, etc. Well, we need to ramp them up. Inversely, client comes in at the end of the day, they've been working and they're stressed and they're just like, they had a rush to get here and they've got something going on with the kids and they're still thinking about work, they're high strung. We actually need to bring them down to here to be able to switch from one zone of life to another zone. And so we ramp up the process so we're not just going straight in and their body is so tense that it's not actually helpful. right? And so it's bridging this gap to be able to get them to where they actually truly need to get the meat and the potatoes to actually get them the best results, and then taking them back down as well. We don't want to leave them like in this state of just wired and fired and like going home and can't go to sleep if they're training in the evenings, or straight to driving and they're like thinking of all these things, or straight to work for the day, right? We want to be able to bring them up, bring them back down, and teach them how to auto-regulate within their systems. And that's why this is very helpful to utilize this approach, because if we do that, they can auto-regulate. I mean, half the problems that your clients deal with are probably stress related, self-induced, right? And understanding or misunderstanding of what is actually happening. And so if we can pull them into the moment, they're going to get better results throughout the rest of their life, not just in that 1 hour-ish that they have. So release. So there's a lot of like controversy on release, foam rolling techniques and lacrosse ball techniques. But here's the reality. If we look back here, what are we trying to do? We're trying to slowly ramp them up. And we know that environment dictates behavior. It's why people like to come to a gym instead of work out at home, because home is this life environment that is for rest, right? It's for digest, it's for connect, it is for whatever. And so the gym, automatically, that environment dictates that behavior. Well, if it is enhanced by a tool, right? It's why smoking was so addictive and is, right? It's because it is the stimulation of when I feel this, it starts to unconsciously regulate you into doing some type of action, right? It's why you need to feel that phone in your pocket or wherever it is. It is not that we are addicted to the phone. It is that we are used to that behavior, right? And so that behavior gives us a sense of understanding of we know what to do, right? And so foam roller could just be that, and that is fine. I'm absolutely fine for that. We do know that it does do some stuff to start to get some blood flow increased, right? Just to decrease some tension that is within there. It's not any different than poor man's massage, as I like to call it. So regardless if it is actually doing anything beyond that, I'm okay with that, because there are so many other benefits to what that is. And so release can often just decrease stiffness in an area to allow us to get some movement back within that position, right? And so sometimes we'll do foam roller, lacrosse ball, etc. Part 2, right? This is the reset. So reset, really, let's just read that goal. It's to optimize biomechanical position. In other words, biomechanics, like the mechanics of the life, right? We're trying to get the body into a position where it is going to function better, right? To create autonomic nervous system balance is really what we're looking for here. Now, we're not going to go into what all of these are, but for the most part, they're really just breathing drills where we're trying to drive air into a certain position to get some things to turn off or to tone down, and to get other things to turn on. Quick example, somebody that is stuck in this position, right? And so we've got their sternum pointing down. We've got from their ribs, right? Their ribs are, their bucket handle is down and their pump handle is down when you're looking at the ribs coming down into this position, which means they can't breathe well into their chest, but they are breathing through posterior expansion into their upper back. Well, what do we need to do? We need to get that client here, because they're probably really tight through the pec minors, really tight through the upper traps, right? They can't do any kind of reach with this arm to get serratus, because that scap is already being pulled to the best of its ability. So the rhomboids are all stretched out. So because of that, in that regard, we would like to get some air up in there, right? And so that can simply help set the stage before they need to go and put a bar on their back. And that may even not be the right exercise for them, but you get what I'm conceptually trying to share here. And so sometimes we just need to slowly ramp them up. A breathing drill or a reset can be the best way to do this, especially if it's pelvic positional. And we'll go into that with future conversations. But here we have a variation of a hook line breathing. She's using bands to help actually pull the body down in through lat engagement, et cetera, right? But these are different variations. So on to stage 3, which is readiness. It's really just your warm-up. It's to prepare the client for the best possible training session on that given day. And the reason that it's worded that way is that they may come in and what they need is drastically different than what you thought they were going to need. And so it's thinking not just what is written, but what is best for them on that day. And we're going to hit 3 main parts here, right? We got the physiology. So getting the body warm, start firing the nervous system, and to get loose. So that's just inevitable. You know, a lot of these movements, that's really all that is. We're just really trying to get the body to know that it's time to go. Lack of a warm up, lack of readiness is just not smart, right, for anybody. Then there's biomechanics, like to optimize alignment and move towards more integrated exercises rather than isolated. So sometimes we start from the ground and we move our way up. So we start with that bretzel on the ground, a breathing drill, driving air, getting rotation. And then we're going to start with some thread the needle, or we're going to do a world's greatest stretch. We're slowly progressing here into the biomechanics of alignment. So we're stacking shoulders over hips, over ribs, et cetera, as we are going, so that we're not just doing these isolated warm-up moves. We're not just, you know, holding a leg up to stretch a hamstring, right? We were moving now through this mobility process. And then we're going to get more specific based on what the workout is. If you're going to squat that day, we probably should mirror some of those patterns where you're going to be doing something that does a squat, right? If you're going to need to have your arms to go overhead that day, we probably should be doing some movements to get the scaps to know how to move, to get the shoulders to get that glenohumeral rhythm to be in place, to be able to get ready to move overhead. If we're sprinting, well, geez, we better work on some form of mechanics that allow us to move in that pattern, right? Some type of gait mechanics. So that's what we're going to go with in there. It's usually 5 to 6 moves max. So we got one here, usually 4 to 6 here, depending on the client. If they are bored easily, I'm going to move quickly through them. And then I'm going to throw some things into their training plan that help incorporate all of that, right? Then we've got reactive. Probably the biggest thing that is missed the most for most people, and it is the one thing that we actually lose first as we age, right? It is power. It is our ability to have power and explosiveness. And if you think like that it's not necessary to really train power when your client is already 75 years old, just think, what is the number one thing that kills them the most? Not really the most, but it is that they trip and they fall, they break their hip, and then within a year they die. Like statistically, like over the age of 65, if you break your hip, within a year, you will be dead. And so the only way that we can prevent that is to catch ourselves in deceleration, which means we need quickness of steps. You trip, you better have that leg that's going to go through. Like I tripped over my dog literally last night and took 2 quick steps. And I'm talking like full on about to face plant. If I didn't have that quick reaction time that comes from power training and explosiveness, right, then I would not have kept myself upright. So, and then it's the ability to have deceleration. So that's what all of this stuff trains. So jumps, sprints, throws, slams, deceleration type training. While you're jumping off the box, just working on deceleration, stepping off things and decelerating, right? Stepping forward, catching yourself. And then, of course, the Olympic lifts. And so it's just variability of these exercises to determine what is best and safest for that client. But here we've got a client that's doing a rotational exercise. That is the first thing we lose when it comes to the planes of motion, right? So the transverse plane, our ability to rotate is the first thing we lose. So we can do power training and rotation training all in the same time. You are literally adding years to your client's life, but you're also adding life to your client's years. Think about that statement for a second, right? We want them to live long, but we want them to enjoy and be able to have a life that they live to the fullest during that time frame. And so we need to be able to train athletically, reactively, but also rotationally first. The client that ends up like just looking like they're barely walking, their feet are moving like they're on, skis going cross country. It's because, yes, they first lost that rotational capacity, so they no longer have transverse plane movement. But think about any type of walking or movement pattern. It is very rotational, but it is also very lateral. Your hips propel back and forth when you're running. So do your shoulders. Your spinal engine, as we call it, is in constant shift, both transverse plane and frontal plane, right? We lose both of those things, and then it turns into this shuffle, and then we have to turn by moving our entire body because we only have sagittal plane left. Then when we do trip, we don't even have power. We are done. Like literally, you can just go ahead and hope you had your way. As bad as that sounds, but that is the reality. So movements that are fast and explosive can be slotted perfectly into this section, even if it's just 1 to 2 sets. But it also sometimes works really well to have it at the end when your client is fatigued and you're trying to train them to be able to have that endurance capacity or how to react when fatigued, okay? We just like it here because then it gets them really warmed and ramped up. Like, let's think about this again, right? This is where they're going to have the most ability to train power, especially like your younger athletes and such like that, where you're wanting to do that power explosive work. You're doing Olympic lifts, you're doing jumps and stuff like that. Think about it. It needs to happen before they're too fatigued, right? And you could have it at the end for other reasons, but that's what I'm going with. Okay. Then we're going to get into resistance. What's the goal? Increase strength. Get strong AF. Any form of resistance training that stimulates muscle development is really what is going to be considered and slotted within this section here. When I am talking about resistance training, I am using that terminology or strength training because ultimately bands, body weight, any of these things can create resistance. I don't call it weight training, right? And that's the reason where you could be using cables. It's all a form of resistance that is happening. I also like resistance training because it is non-threatening for any population. There's still some people that are like, oh, I don't want to do strength training. I just want to tone. Cool, well, let's just do some resistance training. All right, sounds good, right? And so it just kind of bridges the gap, also falls within the R's of the R7 approach and just works really well. So we have a section here before you start looking at the rest of the charts, right? You've got the strength portion. This is where you are getting into a very neural aspect, right? Where you are stimulating not only muscle, but also connective tissue that is happening. You are building strength. 1 to 6 reps is kind of the norm as far as that range, and 1 to 5, written here. Honestly, it's just dependent on how much quick muscle fibers you have versus slow twitch, etc. It's splitting hairs. Okay. And I just loved this little chart and didn't want to recreate one. Hypertrophy 8 to 15. This is where you're doing more muscle growth, right? It's stimulating more of that muscle hypertrophy, whereas atrophy is the loss of muscle. So we're going to spend the bulk of our time here for most of our clientele, both from both an overall strength increase effect, but also from a visual, physique change effect. That is what, if we don't give them that, like, they probably won't stick. Okay. And then muscular endurance falls in that 15 plus rep range. Yes, you can get strong in any one of these categories, right? But ultimately, like, if we look, I don't know, I want to look at this yet. And you can get strong in any one of these categories, okay? But we want to be able to have sections for each, okay? So this is what we looked at: breakdown population 30 to 60. It's really like 30 to 80. It's really like pretty much anybody. but ultimately, when we are looking at the pure strength, the 1 to 5 rep range, for the most people looking for functional general health and fitness and wellness, looking at 5 to 10% of your overall training effect being within that strength zone, that sub 5 rep strength zone. And when you look at the entire training plan as a whole, for the most part, most of us have anywhere from 6 to 8 exercises, maybe 12 if you got some kind of endurance bunny or etc. But you also have those 6 warm-up exercises. So when you look at this as a whole, it's like 15 different total exercises. And so you're like, all right, cool, 5 to 10%. So like 1 to 2 of them makes sense, right? And then you want 60 to 75%, the majority of it, to be in kind of that hypertrophy zone, because we really are trying to build as much muscle around our joints as possible to teach our body the 2 different aspects of strength, right? The 2 different aspects that each muscle has. You have muscle action, you have muscle function. So the action is moving from insertion to origin, right? So for instance, if we are to flex the bicep, okay, we are moving the forearm towards the body. So the bicep is moving from insertion to origin because it is contracting, right? So now inversely, it is a function to stabilize the shoulder, to rotate the forearm. There's a lot of function that it has, but that's not its action. So its function is going to be to do some form of stabilization and assistance with other moving parts of the body. And we want to be able to have both, okay? So that's why we want to have a lot of focus on hypertrophy. But then you have smaller muscle groups, your triceps, your calves, your serratus, different things like this that do really well under muscular endurance. Now, when we're looking at this, you can also look at it from time under tension. So when we're looking at the 1 to 5 rep range, oftentimes people are only going to be lifting a weight or resistance within that from like a 10 to 20 second range, whereas hypertrophy may be from that 20 to a minute range, whereas endurance, muscular endurance, is probably at least the 40-second plus range up to 2-minute range. And you think about it, you can't lift a heavy deadlift for up to 2 minutes. We are going to then have to be lighter, and then we're going to train muscular endurance. We need and do well with both. It is just to show you the spectrum. Now, why is it that we wouldn't want to put all hypertrophy if someone is just wanting to be bodybuilding, just change their physique? So with strength, notice there are people that are crazy strong, like freakishly strong, right? But they are not, quote unquote, jacked or shredded, right? So they may be a very tiny person and can lift an insane amount of weight. And you're like, oh man, they are so compact and so strong. They just don't look it. Or they may be like a strongman competitor. They're huge, right? Because they want to lift extreme amounts of weight, but they don't present as very muscular. Yes, they have a lot of strength, right? But they may look like they're just a larger individual carrying more body fat than someone else. And you have these two different presentations of extreme strength, but not hypertrophy. But so why wouldn't I just train hypertrophy? Think about those people. They are strong not only through their muscles, but also through their connective tissues, their tendons, right? Their fascia. And so if we are only to train hypertrophy, just this constant sheer volume and repetition, usually then we end up with what's common for bodybuilders, tendonitis in different joints. So things start to break down because the joints themselves we're getting too much muscular pump, and the muscle at some point is pulling more than the tendon tissues can keep up with. And so if we train also within a little bit of that strength perspective, we are going to strengthen the connective tissues that are around it and allow then the muscles to go. So we want to balance this out. And so it's a give and take, right? We don't want to be all strength either, because at a certain point we're like, I'm too strong, I can't get any stronger, and I'm just stuck at these weights, I can't go up. Yeah, no shit, because you need to increase the musculature, the hypertrophy of the muscles that are around it in order to then pull those things, in order to move those weights. So we do need both, okay? So that's why we want to look at this perspective here. Now, the force velocity curve, I think, is helpful. It's even more helpful when you're looking at gait mechanics, speed mechanics, etc. But ultimately, maximal isometric strength, it's kind of fun, right? Because you can hold a weight or hold a position or, do some kind of overcoming isometric. There's conversations for later days, for more power and presentation than you can just with sheer strength. You can control, in between here is the eccentric. You can control a weight down, right? Much longer and for much more weight than you can to get it back up to the concentric. So you have this top piece where there's just sheer insane force, right? Very low velocity. There's no speed that is happening with it whatsoever. And then you start to gain a little bit of speed with it, but barely anything as you go into maximal strength. Then we go into strength and speed. And honestly, like, this is where a lot of your hypertrophy tends to live. Okay. Then you go into your muscular endurance. That's where a lot of this tends to live, right? Then you get into just sheer speed, where you're going into those higher velocities. And then you go into overspeed, where you're starting to run into issues where usually then you're out of control, right? And so it's only the sheer, like, insane athletes that can do that, okay? Then after that, we've got R6. R6 is resiliency. We do need a higher level of work capacity, aka conditioning, aka cardio output. Call it what you would like. I call it conditioning. But you're trying to build a more resilient human being here. And we do that with better cardio output than anything, okay? And we've got several different ways to do it. The one that is the most underrated, the most needed, is honestly the last one on this list, which is your zone 2 low-level, long endurance training. The more you can get your clients doing 30 minutes, even 20 minutes of zone 2, and that's where their heart rate is within that zone, basically usually between like kind of that 110 and 130 beats per minute. Really just depends on how well their VO2 max is, how well they are able to expel the carbon dioxide that is building up within their system, and also how well they are able to maintain their body's resistance to it. Like how good are they at dealing with it, and letting it build up and not letting it affect them, right? Is what is going to determine those VO2 maxes. And so then ultimately, like, we want to get them to do as much of this zone two as possible. Like, the health benefits are just insane that come from this. This is what we're designed to do. And some people can do that while doing a very low, mild run. Some people do it when they're only walking and with nothing. So it really kind of depends on the overall athletic ability and conditioning of that human being, right? Where they are at. But we have several different things here. Not going to get into the details on it today. But we've got AP, right? Alactic power. So when we're training power, you're literally just going to be so short, so fast that it's almost impossible for it to catch up to you. You don't even realize you're done before you're done. You're never going to get a burn, right? There's never that calcium buildup called lactic acid. You don't really have lactic acid that's building up in your body, but I say that for a different conversation. It is that burn that you are feeling. You're not burning through everything, like all your ATP isn't instantly gone. But we are focused on that alactic power for 5 to 8 seconds of work. This is like your sheer fear, like power based moves that are like really intense. So the bike, sled sprint, full regular sprint would be another good one. Anything that you can drive so super fast, over and over and over again within that time frame. A lot of times people are like, well, yeah, you could do jumps. Not many people can get that sheer insane volume that you can't hold past 8 seconds with something like that. And that's what you're thinking, like, what could I do all out that I could not hold past 8 seconds within this? If it can, then you're in more of a alactic capacity. You're increasing the capacity within that realm of the body's output. That's at 10 to 20 seconds. Of course, we have, then it goes up from there into more the lactic power, which is where most of your interval training groups and such tend to be 20 to 30 seconds, lactic capacity of 30 to 120 seconds. And so you can see how a lot of this is correlated, honestly, with your lifting. It's just that it's going to use different tools and modalities to hit it from a different way. So yes, 20 to 30 seconds, lactic power, you're going to be doing power training. You could do like 5 cleans with that, right? Or you could do some heavy lifting with that. And you're going to create all of that power and not get that full burn. And it's just going to be very taxing on the system. But we're looking from a resiliency standpoint on stuff that is not neurologically taxing on the system. Like, you're not actually loading or anything of that nature, right? And then you got HICT, high intense continuous training, as opposed to interval training. So this is where, like, say you put a weight vest on and you do step ups, right? You do a stair climber, you do a Jacob's ladder. It's anything that is like, oh my gosh, the heart rate is now going to be at that 150 plus for the most part, and you are pushing to try initially doing nasal breathing, and then you're just going to have to breathe out your mouth as you need for that 10 plus minutes to build that max capacity of longer term endurance resiliency. So as opposed to the short work, this is the longer work when you're really pushing. I did a lot of this when I was training for Denali and had to pull a really heavy sled at really thin oxygen, high levels of mountaineering, right? And then you've got your zone 2, which I kind of already talked about. And then our last category here is R7, recovery. So the goal is really just to try and switch into a parasympathetic state. And this is what we talked about at the very beginning of that first slide, where I'm like, bring them back down. Don't leave them wired and fired to go back in. And a lot of it's just breathing. If you look at the world's greatest fighters, MMA fighters, etc., right? Like Sugar Sean is like a great example of this if you follow any of that world. But he literally does like a bunch of meditative breathing after every session, right? And his coach, his trainer up in Phoenix, is phenomenal at doing that to make sure, like, that's his whole drive, like, bring you back down, shut off, in the zone, connected, bringing your system back to start recovery, right? If we're allowing that and we're constantly wired, then we're just taking on more of the things that are just going to make us not recover well at all. So maybe it's foam rolling, maybe it's super low intense activity recovery, like my wife loves, just sitting back on the bike and just focusing on breathing and getting nose down. But it's this cool down, as it's called in a lot of places, right? That works really well for most clients, so you don't send them out, right? When you're designing your program, this is the last thing I want you to think about, right? Last 2 things, really. But the goal is to accomplish all of the movement patterns, providing bias towards functional needs while ensuring client satisfaction through structural indications and preferences. So what does that really mean? So you've got your 6 patterns. We want somebody to squat, to hinge, to push, to pull, to lunge, to carry. 6 basic things, right? How you do that, millions of ways, but remember, we're trying to eliminate 99% of it. So we want to have those main things, okay? We want to provide some bias towards their functional needs. So if the person lacks the functional ability to control their spine and they're dealing with low back pain when they're hinged over, we want to bias towards some exercise selection and movement patterns that increase the ability to control their body in that position. We want to bias their functional needs first. Muscle action, movement central to origin, muscle function, stabilization, right? And so we want to bias what is needed for that client as the top priority. Do they need to move better? Do they need to move more? What is it that they need? But we also want to ensure client satisfaction. And so sometimes that means biasing a little bit of the meat and the potatoes towards whatever their structural indications are. So for instance, somebody that maybe presents their body in a big bro, wide chest, wide infrasternal angle type position, and they love bench pressing. Do we want to be doing more bench pressing? They've got like shoulder issues. They can't get their arm overhead. Well, we want to maybe bias a lot towards getting these reaches and doing all of these exercises we know are going to increase their functional capacity, but we also want to find a way to dose what they enjoy. Their body likes going here. Its skeletal structure indicates it goes there well. So we want to give them that. We don't want to take that away and go completely the other side. We want to give them some things that they like, that they do well, because we don't want to lose them either. And as we are doing them, we can find slowly ways to increase the range and positions we are going for. So they're still getting what they like and what their body indicates it enjoys, but we're getting more towards that functional need, okay? Also preferences. If my guy loves and wants biceps, the last thing on his training plan, almost every single day, is going to be some kind of arm throwing. I'm going to leave him with what he loves, but I'm going to do it at the very end. So it's the last thing he remembers, because we rarely remember anything that happens in the beginning or the middle. We only remember how we felt when we left, when we finished. And so if somebody's like, I really want to feel my abs, that could really be a conversation where it's really, I just am trying to lose fat around my midsection. Maybe it needs to be more nutrition conversation, etc. But I'm going to make sure that they feel their abs. And then they feel satisfied, because then they're going to stick with it, right? They don't have to stick with me, but they're going to fall in love, hopefully, with the process. And that's what really matters, is that whether they fire me today, tomorrow, or a year from now, because I want them to be so well equipped with all of the tools, the knowledge, and the ability to be able to fire me, because then that means they can teach other people. And hopefully they can teach their kids or their grandkids, and we can break the cycles that are happening currently within the United States and around the world with lack of mobility, lack of strength, and an obesity epidemic. And so ultimately, we want to try to give them a little bit of what they love. The lady that's like, I want to work glutes, sweet, I'm going to give you a booty burnout, okay? Common training plan options. Last slide, talking about today, the Programming 101 high level. I want you to consider these are the kind of main four that most people enjoy and fall into. You've got total body here. So someone that's only going to do 1, 2, maybe even 3 days a week, right? And especially if they're a novice, or if they're wanting and can handle that higher volume of repetition, like, I am going to bias total body, especially if it's 2 days, okay? Because if I have somebody who's total body, I want to get a push of the chest, maybe from one angle one day, and a push from the other day. So you may be thinking, well, I don't want to do both, but they're only doing 2 days a week. So if I'm going to have a chest press variation on one day, I'm going to have a fly variation on the other day, and I'm going to have 2 shoulder variations of pushing on both of those days as well. I'm going to have two forms. I'm going to have a reverse lunge on one day and probably a Bulgarian split squat on the other day, or whatever the case may be on those positions of the body. And even if it's 3 days a week, if I have somebody that really wants to target a certain area, total body works really well. Nothing wrong with hitting the total body every single time. Build that resiliency from that person. Then we have upper lower split, right? I honestly don't typically enjoy upper lower split unless somebody is doing at least 4 days. Nothing wrong with it, right? It's just that oftentimes they're not seeing that position of the body, right? That section for a really long time. And so they're constantly having to really push really hard in order to get results. And it's really hard to then recover, or they usually don't push hard enough. And so if I've got somebody for 4 days or even 3, if they want to bias more of a upper, lower, upper, right? And then the next week, lower, upper, lower, I'm okay with that. But ultimately 4 is kind of the sweet spot where now we can do upper, more push based, or upper, more strength based on one of the days. Lower, same thing. And then on my other 2 days, I'm going to go more dynamic. So I'm going to hit a little bit more of the higher volume speed aspects that come into play. And this is very conjugate style, which is popular by Louis Simmons, rest in peace, who had some of those strongest people still coming out of Westside Barbell of Ohio, right? We also have more of a anterior to posterior push-pull. Really like this for people that are 2 days a week, 3 days a week, where your push is going to be all of your anterior based. So that just means that your squat is considered a push movement, right? And so your split squat is going to be a push movement. Your pull is going to include for the lower body a RDL or a deadlift or a hinge pattern. So you're including the lower body patterns into the push, right? And as opposed to when we're looking at our patterns here, this is considered upper body push, both horizontal and vertical vectors here, and then same thing for pull. This is looking at it from total body push movements, total body pull movements. And you can do this with the 2-day, 3-day, 4-day plan, which is what I really like. And then you've got the body section biased version, right? So you're going to bias towards push, upper. You're going to bias towards pull, lower, upper. And then you're going to go with a leg day, right? And this works really well if you're doing a 3-day. If you're going to do a 4, throw an extra one on there. It would more than likely be accessory. And that's where your accessories would also add in more of the leg elements that you would possibly miss because you couldn't have the sheer enough volume from one day of legs to be able to accommodate. So you could have all your main basics here, but then you could do like a single leg RDL. You could do like, a B stance glute bridge, different things that would fill in the gaps is the way an accessory would be looked at. So these are your common 4 you're most likely going to see, most likely going to deal with, that work really well for most people. And within that, the beauty is you can still follow for all of those this overall curve, right? The R7 approach to all of it. So that's all I have for you today as far as like a high level 101. Hope it was helpful. And in the next one, we will be going over how to actually write the training plan that would be ideal for it. All right.